Unit 1, Lost Colony of Roanoke. This is an overview of the note outline in relation to the module that speaks about the Lost Colony of Roanoke found in Canvas. So, what is the Lost Colony of Roanoke really all about? Well, let's start with a little bit of background. Roanoke was a colony that was founded by Great Britain. In today's world, we would say that the island was located off the shore of modern day North Carolina, here inside the United States of America. Also, understand that this colony that was settled was not the first one, and it wasn't the first group to be here either. The British, or in Great Britain, they had actually sent two other groups to the same location in years prior. The first group showed up to map out the area for future groups. They are surveyors. Think back to our social science tools. These are the individuals that would pull together data in order to form maps and potentially create the best solutions or best ideas on where to construct a society. The second group came with the intent of science and military. We don't really know exactly what that all entails, but what we do know is by 1586, the local Native American tribes would actually drive this group out because they saw them as invaders. And a lot of reason behind that was because the Native Americans were upset that the British were landing in the area and they're taking up land and resources. Imagine any example of a group of people living in an area for what could be hundreds of years, and then another random group of people comes in and says, "You've done all this work, you live on this land, we're going to take all of it, and there's nothing you can say about it." So, needless to say, the Native American nations at that time were not always thrilled to see these individuals coming over from Britain and trying to create their colonies. We'll get more to that later. The other thing is the third group would be the first one to actually bring individuals aside from just men to the field. 17 women, 11 children, and 90 men. Okay? The reason this is important is because it indicates that Great Britain and the colony of Roanoke was looking to actually settle compared to just a military conquest of taking over things. When you have a mix of families coming into an area, the idea is that population will increase and they will settle in the area. Also understand that this takes place hundreds of years ago. In fact, it takes place hundreds of years before the American Revolution. That's how impactful this is. So this would start in approximately 1587. And to give you perspective, the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. The Constitution would not be made until 1787. So the government of the United States that we know today really would not have gotten started until 200 years after this. Side note, 400 years after this, I was born. Just fun fact. By 1590, the entire settlement, though, had disappeared. So in 1587, this third group of explorers with women and children and families, they come to this island off the shore of North Carolina to create a settlement. 3 years into their settlement, when people came to Roanoke, they discovered that everyone had disappeared. Now note, we're not saying they died. There were no bodies to be found, but everyone was gone. The only thing that was found was the word Croatan, carved on the gate of the community, and Crow, C-R-O, carved into a nearby tree. That's the only hint we have. So what happened to this group? There are several theories about what happened to the Lost Colony of Roanoke. First, many believe that the group was wiped out by disease. So consider this. We see this with a COVID epidemic in 2020. If the body is not familiar with a specific strain of bacteria or virus, then it cannot create antibodies to fight against it. The same was true when Europeans would travel to North America. There are different strains of bacteria and viruses in North America versus what people were used to in Europe. Because of that, there's some belief that people would die when they came to North America because they had no antibodies to fight off these different germs. That's the first theory. Others believe that the group was wiped out by a Native American attack, that the nations of North America finally got fed up and wiped them out. We know that this is a feasible theory because of the second group and the documentation that we have that they were not thrilled that the second group came in with a military presence. And finally, a crisis took place of some sort that caused the colonists to flee. So we don't really know what the main event was, but whatever happened, the people split from that area and disappeared. Some may have traveled south to an island known as Croatan Island. Please note earlier that the word Croatan was carved into a tree. Some may have traveled west to an area occupied by sympathetic Native American tribes. So while there were a few nations, North American nations, that were not thrilled with the explorers, some of them also were not necessarily hostile towards them. It resulted in mixed results. The Secotán tribe had hostilities towards the colonists. The Roanoke tribe controlled the waterways, and they weren't real friends either. Waterways would be the primary mode of travel. So think about it. This is the time before cars, even a time really before wagons and trains. So your main transportation, or the fastest, would be get on a boat or a canoe or some form of craft and go onto the water. There's also records of battles between the Secotán and Roanoke, and also the Secotán and the colonists. So there's recorded conflicts and skirmishes taking place between all these three groups. So some theorize that perhaps the Secotán attacked the colonists at Roanoke. They fled and went to the Roanoke to settle. Once again, we don't know for fact. And also know that there had been two groups prior that explored the area. So one of the things to remember is that it's important to look at perspective. What looked as an interpretation of exploration for one group could have also been interpreted as an invasion to another, meaning resentment towards colonists already existed because of the other two groups. If there is a problem within the colony, there is a high likelihood that an area tribe would not offer assistance. So even if there was a crisis that took place with the colonists, say disease, for example, there was a high likelihood that they were not going to get any assistance from the other tribes in the area because they already had a bad taste in their mouth about these foreign invaders. The colonists also, if they fled, would have to do so in small groups because they easily outpopulate the area tribes. There was more of them than there were in many of the tribes, so they would have to split up. What possibly is most interesting about all of this is the fact that it's still unresolved. Over 400 years later, we still don't have a concrete answer about what happened to the colony of Roanoke. Researchers and historians are still digging around, quite literally, around this area, trying to find out why they disappeared. It is one of the greatest colonial unsolved mysteries in North America. One thing that should be noted, though, North America and its people would not be an easy place for Europeans to live in. So here's the other thing to consider. Just think about winter where you live in the United States, or think about summer. There's a high likelihood that one of those two, based on where you live, is rather rough to deal with. If you live in the mountains, the winter can be very, very deadly. If you live in the desert, the summers can be unbearingly hot. If you live along the ocean, you may have to deal with hurricanes. If you live near California, you have wildfires and earthquakes. And if you live in the middle of the United States, say Missouri, for example, you may have to deal with blizzards during the winter, droughts during the summer, and tornadoes during the spring. So there's a lot going on, and that doesn't even match the geography of multiple mountain ranges you'd have to travel through, and marshes and swamps and crossing rivers. There's a lot going on in North America. It's not the easiest land to traverse. Versus coming from a country, Great Britain, or England specifically, that's the size of roughly the state of Missouri. It gives you a whole different perspective. A lot of the Europeans that traveled to North America were not skilled in the ability to survive in the elements of North America. We still, believe it or not, see that to this day in some instances. So the Lost Colony of Roanoke is called that because it's a mystery. We don't really know what happened. There's a lot of theories, And there's evidence for almost all those theories, but no one has an absolute fact yet.